Okay, so are you ready to dive deep into English grammar today?
Always ready to talk
All
grammar.
right, well, this deep dive is all about mastering English grammar
Mastering.
and doing it fast.
Fast. Yeah.
So we're looking at this text called Two Ways to Master English Grammar Fast.
Uh,
And it promises some pretty unconventional techniques.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of makes you think,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
are there really faster, more engaging ways to learn grammar?
Right, because the traditional way can be a little
Yeah.
dry, let's face it.
Yeah, and I think we've all been there with like,
Oh, yeah.
the textbooks and the
Silly, that's
worksheets and the
great.
memorization.
That can be a bit much.
It is. Yeah, so this idea of like tapping into the way our brains kind of naturally learn language
Right.
sounds pretty appealing.
It does, because it's about making the process more engaging,
Right.
instead of this chore that you have to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
The first method that they talk about is immersion through real world content. So
Real world content.
yeah, so I mean, are they suggesting we ditch the textbooks and just like binge watch Netflix or something?
Well, I don't think it's about ditching the textbooks completely,
Right.
but more about supplementing them with
Okay.
authentic language experiences.
Okay.
So you're still getting that foundation,
Right.
but you're also kind of immersing yourself in how the language is used naturally.
So it's kind of like picking it up by osmosis almost.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. When you watch a movie,
Right.
you're not actively analyzing the grammar,
Right.
but you're still absorbing it,
That's true.
right?
Subconsciously.
Okay, but I do have a question about this.
Okay.
Wouldn't that take ages to actually learn anything that way?
Well, it's not just about passively consuming content.
Okay.
It's about being more aware of how the language is being used.
Okay.
So, for example,
Yeah.
if you're reading a news article,
Okay.
pay attention to how they structure those complex sentences,
Right.
how they use formal grammar.
Formal grammar.
If you're enjoying a novel, notice how the author is crafting dialogue and bringing characters to life
Okay.
with those unique voices.
Okay.
It's about actively engaging with the language as you're experiencing it.
So it's about being mindful
Mindful, yes.
of the language you're
That's it.
exposed to.
Yeah, and not just kind of zoning out in front of the TV.
Right. Right. I do remember like picking up certain phrases
Yeah,
from watching foreign films.
absolutely.
But what about like accuracy?
Okay.
Won't you pick up bad habits
Oh, that's a good point.
from like casual online language?
Yes.
Like, slang,
Yes,
incorrect grammar.
that is a valid concern.
Yeah.
I think it's about choosing your sources wisely
Okay.
and being aware of the different registers of language.
Different register.
Yeah, so like the level of formality.
Oh, okay.
You can certainly learn a lot from casual content,
Yeah.
but it's essential to balance it with exposure to more formal language use.
Mm.
Okay, I'm starting to see how immersion can be a really powerful tool.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to the second method,
Okay.
which is learning through storytelling.
Oh, this one's interesting.
I have to admit, this is the one that really piqued my interest.
I can see why.
Yeah.
It's very creative,
Yeah.
and it really taps into our innate love for narratives.
So how does this work?
Well, the idea is to craft your own stories or even adapt existing ones to practice specific grammar points.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say you're working on conditional sentences.
Right.
You could write a story about a character who has to make a really difficult choice and then explore the different consequences
Okay.
that could have happened if they had made a different decision.
That's cool.
Right.
So instead of memorizing these like dry rules,
Yeah.
you're actually using them.
Yes, you're actively using the grammar in a creative way.
Yeah, and that's probably more memorable too.
It is. It's about making it meaningful
Yeah.
and engaging.
And I guess it kind of makes sense because
Okay.
like think about how kids learn language.
Exactly.
They listen to stories.
They create their own little worlds.
Yeah.
And in the process, they internalize those grammatical structures without even realizing it.
Without even realizing it.
It's amazing.
That's so cool.
It is.
So it's like we're tapping into that same,
Exactly.
that innate ability.
So by weaving the grammar into a narrative,
Yeah,
you're not just memorizing rules, you're actually like understanding how they function.
exactly. It becomes less about rules and more about expressing yourself,
Right.
which is really what language is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So could you give me like a more concrete example
Sure.
of how this would work?
So imagine you're learning about the past, perfect tense.
Okay.
Now, this can be a tricky one to grasp.
Right.
The concept of an action completed before another action in the past.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mind bend.
It is. It's a bit of a mind bend, but If you were writing a story about time travel,
You could use the past perfect to describe the events that happened before your character went back in time,
ooh,
effectively showing that cause and effect relationship
oh wow,
between those past events
that's actually really cool.
and the present situation.
Yeah, it suddenly makes so much more sense
Right.
than just like looking at a bunch of isolated sentences in a textbook.
Exactly, because you're embedding the grammar point
Yeah.
within a narrative.
Right.
You're not only practicing its application,
Yeah.
but you're also understanding its purpose and effect.
Yeah,
It's a much more holistic way of learning.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've explored these two very different approaches to learning English grammar.
We have.
Immersion through real-world content
Yes.
and learning through storytelling.
Two very different but very effective methods.
Yeah, and they both seem to kind of move away from this traditional
Right.
rote learning
Yeah.
and focus on something that's more organic and engaging.
It's about tapping into that natural way that our brains learn and making it fun.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is that it doesn't have to stop with grammar.
That's true.
Yeah,
It's a broader principle.
it is. Yeah,
Think about it.
yeah.
Could we learn math through composing music,
Mhm.
history through writing historical fiction?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
how else can we tap into this natural way of learning and apply it to other areas of our lives?
That's a great question.
It's something worth pondering, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, thanks for this deep dive.
my pleasure.
I feel like I've learned a lot.
I'm glad to hear that.
And yeah, I'm excited to try out some of these techniques.
I encourage you to.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Sounds good.